All right, Javosai, good morning, a good tavach. Hopefully everyone had a beautiful, uplifting, and meaningful Shabbos. A great zechus, Baruch Hashem, to be able to continue and begin a new week of Masechah Sanhedrin together. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the year of Tafshin Pei Hey, our annual TALMUD TORAH sponsor, Tilson Family of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all of the shiurim and drushos for this year as a zechus for besuros, tovos for Am Yisroel. Our week of learning sponsors Rabbi Aryeh and Chana Richter, in memory of Rabbi Richter's dear grandmother Sarah Bas Shimon Zichron Levracha, who was niftaris this past week. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, the neshama will have an aliyah, the family in the Chama, and of course, as always, we dedicate our learning in the zechus of our precious hostages. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu continue to bring them home b'shalom and b'karov, and in the merit of our holy soldiers, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu allow them to be successful b'chol ma'asei yedehem. So with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. Okay, an incredible daf ahead of us today. I'm sorry. All right, perfect. Okay, so let's begin. So today's daf is Mem Zayin, 57. I believe Rabbi Richter left off about 6 lines into the wide lines. Is that correct? Ibaylahu, Kvura Mishum Bizyona. Good. So ask the Gemara. Both say some really interesting sugyas here that are quite fascinating. So Mem Vavam base 46b, about 6 lines into the wide lines. Gemara asks the kasha, Kvura Mishum Bizyonahu or Mishum Kaparahu. When we bury the dead, do we bury the dead ultimately again because not to bury them is considered to be a bizayon, a degradation or a humiliation for the dead, or is it because that burial affects kapara? So the Gemara says, when our burial affects atonement, the Gemara says, what does it matter? Da'amar lo ba'ina delik barua lahu gavra. What happens if a person says, right, Reuven's about to die, and Reuven says, you know what? Don't bury me. Don't bury me. You know what? Don't spend the money. Levi is expensive. Just don't bury me. It's all right. So is a person allowed to say, don't bury me? So the Gemara says, it depends. See, if it's about degradation and humiliation, so remember again, it's degradation and humiliation doesn't only impact the dead, it also impacts the family. It's going to be humiliating for a family to have someone unburied. If you look at Rashi says over here, Lav kol kamine, Rashi says, almost right across, the bizayin hu lekrovav, because it is an embarrassment for the relatives. So if it's a din and humiliation, so it's not just a din and humiliation for the dead, for the deceased person, because again, the dead person is dead. One of the good parts about being dead is you don't get easily embarrassed, right? Baruch Hashem, right? So in other words, so Lamaisa, you have to see the bright side of everything in life, right? So Lamaisa, again, at least when you're dead, there's no humiliation. So it's not bizayon. So in other words, when we say degradation, who's being humiliated? It's the family, because the family is having their relative who's unburied. So if it's a din and humiliation, even if Reuben says, don't bury me, we don't listen to him. On the other hand, the armit mishum kapara, but if at the end of the day, perhaps burial is about atonement. Perhaps burying the dead is part of the atonement for the dead. So then halacha l'maisa, again, I will say, if you take a look at Rashi says over here, kihechi de tehevile kapara bahatmana zu shemaridin umashpilin oso betachtios. I will say, it could very well be, and we'll see this, we've seen this already mentioned, we'll see it more today, that burial, death affects atonement. And it could very well be that part of the atonement of death is burial, is being put in the ground. That's part of the atonement of the individual. Now we'll say, now I'll show you something beautiful in this Rashi. If you look the way Rashi describes burial, he says, again, Rabbi, so you see that Rashi? The Rashi is right across from the last short line in the Gemara. When we bury someone, burial itself is a kapara. Bahatmana zu. Look how Rashi describes burial. Rashi describes burial as hatmana. Hatmana literally means insulation. So, in other words, you go ahead, you take a pot, you wrap it in a towel, that's called hatmana. Rashi calls burial a hatmana. We'll say, what is this Rashi? What is Rashi trying to highlight over here? Burial is not a permanent state. Burial means you're putting a body in the ground and you're keeping it there. You're insulating it there until something else. What's the something else? Mashiach. Right? That's the entire yesod of burial. When we say, and that's why I will say, that's why amazingly enough, in Jewish burial, there's no flowers. Right? In Eretz Yisrael, it's interesting, you see it, right? In Eretz Yisrael, you see it especially by the soldier burials. But again, in general, we don't have flowers by a funeral. Why is that? Why is that? So there's really two reasons. The Geshe Chaim brings down. Number one is because often, like conventional thinking is, do whatever you can to pretty up death. In other words, whatever you do, don't make death look like death. That's why if you see by other religions, what will often happen is all the earth is covered, right? You'll never see a mound of dirt, and there's wreaths, there's flowers, it looks beautiful. Then what happens? There's the service, everyone leaves, and then what happens? Then the dirt comes out, the digging happens. Why? Because the goal is to really cosmeticize death. I don't know if that's a word, but I'm going to use it, right? Cosmeticize, like just make it look pretty, make it look nice. Yiddishkeit understands that one of the most important parts of mourning, which is one of the most important parts of life, is whatever you're going through, lean into it. Whatever you're going through, lean into it. Just put yourself in it. So there's death, okay, lean into it. What's death? Death is finality. Death is the end. Death is my loved one is going into the ground and they're going to be buried. And there's no point in pretending that it's any prettier than it is, because it's not. It's difficult. It's heartbreaking. It could be devastating at times. But the sooner you lean into it, the sooner one is able to practically deal with it. That's number one. Number two is at the end of the day, we believe, if you make a funeral into a big final send-off, then it looks like this is the end. But it's not the end. Death is not the end. And not just the end because the neshama goes to Olam Haba. We believe in Mashiach. We believe in Tchias HaMesim, resurrection of the dead. We believe that this is just another stage. Just like birth is a stage of life, death is a stage of life. But it's not the end. So I don't have to make a whole big deal out of it, because at the end of the day, it's just another stage. And I say Rashi's Lashon here is so profound. B'hatmana, we're putting the body into the ground, so to speak, to insulate it. It's a holding place. Holding for what? Till Mashiach comes and the dead come back to life. Mihira b'yameinu. So we'll say, so that's the shaila. So everyone agrees there's a din of burial. It's a din of burial. I'll say, you should just know, by the way, one of the, by the halachas of mourning, there are so many different halachas. Many of the halachas are really minhag. That's why you'll find in different communities, people really do different things. But the one thing that everyone agrees with is burial in the ground. That's the halacha. It's interesting, by the way. I remember when I came to Baltimore, I never saw this before in my life. But first, one of the early advice I did is that in some of the cemeteries here, they utilize vaults. Now, sometimes it's because of the water table or different things like that. Never saw it before in my life. So again, a lot of interesting halachic shaylas with it also. But again, fascinating. But I'm saying, but even then, it's in the ground. Okay. So in any event, the Gemara says as follows. So that's the shayla. So why do we bury? Do we bury because of bizayon? If you don't bury, it's going to be a degradation for the family. Or do we bury because burial is kapara? It's atonement for the dead. So what's nafkamina? Reuven's on his deathbed. He gathers his family. He says, Chavra, do me a favor. I'd rather you go on a Pesach program. Don't spend the money on burial. Right? Don't spend the money on burial. Take the money. It was a joke. It was a tough crowd here today. All right, good. Take the money, use it for a Pesach program, and make a l'chaim for me, a little shlivovitz for me on Pesach, right? And that's, I don't want to be buried. So Moshe said, can you do that? So it depends. If burial is about kapara, okay, so we can say, I don't want the kapara. If burial is about humiliation and degradation, then Lamaisa, again, even though Reuven doesn't want it, Reuven doesn't have a right to bring degradation and humiliation upon his family. Which I will say, by the way, is also another tremendous yisod. In life, you could do whatever you want, but you can't do whatever you want when what you want to do has implications upon other people. So sometimes we forget that the choices we make don't only impact us, but the choices we make have a ripple effect on our family, on our friends, and our community. So you could choose whatever you want for you, as long as it only impacts you. But the moment your decisions and your choices have an impact on other people, you must absolutely, unequivocally keep that in mind before making a final decision. So that's our Shaila. So it says the Gemara, let's go. So the Gemara says, Tashma b'di ikber tzadiki. So we'll say, listen to this. Well, it's obvious, because we buried tzadikim. They say, now the fact that we've even buried tzaddikim, now obviously, what does that show you? That shows you that burial is because to avoid humiliation and degradation. Because do tzaddikim need kapara? Tzaddikim don't need any type of kapara, to which the Gemara says something absolutely amazing. No, tzaddikim, the Gemara says, it's not true. Even tzaddikim need atonement. Why? Adam ein tzaddik ba'aretz sheyaseh tov v'lo yechta. It will say one of the most profound psukim in all of Tanakh. Shlomo Melech says in Kahalas, Ki ein Adam ein tzaddik ba'aretz asher yaseh tov lo. There is no such thing as a tzaddik who doesn't mess up. Even the greatest of tzaddikim makes mistakes. Even of the greatest of tzaddikim, when he dies, is in requirement of kapara. Incredible. Tashma, so we still haven't answered it. Tashma, v'saptulo kol Yisrael v'kavru also. Shabbos say the pasuk says they eulogize, all of Klal Yisrael eulogized him and they buried him. This is Aryeh ben Yeravam. Yeravam ben Nevat, unfortunately, again was one of the kings of Malchus Yisrael, the first king of Malchus Yisrael, of the split kingdom, and unfortunately introduced a lot of avodah zarah. He had a son by the name of Avyah. Well, he had a number of sons, but his son Avyah was one of his righteous children. So the pasuk says they eulogized him and they buried him. Hanach nami likbaru. But if you tell me that ultimately that burial is for kapara, so why is only Avyah buried? Why aren't all the other sons buried as well? So the Gemara says, Hai did tzadiku tehavile kapara. Hanach lo lihavilu kapara. No, because sometimes the halach is like this. Tzadikim deserve kapara. Rishoim don't deserve kapara. Tashma lo yispadu v'lo yikbaru de lo tehavile kapara. Okay, so we'll say, so therefore, the Gemara kind of ends off, and the Gemara doesn't tell us exactly what the reason is for. Now, it happens to be the way the Rabban Paskins is that the entire essence of burial is because of degradation. That's how the Rabban Paskins. But the truth is, it's really both. It's really, again, that burial itself affects part of the kapara. Also, we're going to see essentially that there are three parts to kapara, to the atonement power of death. There's death, there's burial, and then there is the decomposition. Thank you. Decomposition of the remains. Those are the three parts that affect atonement. But burial itself really serves this twofold purpose of halacha l'maisa again, that atonement, and also saves the family from degradation. I will say, by the way, this is actually very important because this comes up, unfortunately, often. What happens if a family member leaves instructions to be cremated? Right? Or even not as strong as that. Let's say they leave instructions for above ground burial. Now, in general, there is a mitzvah to be mekayim divrei hameis. There is a mitzvah to uphold the last will and testament of someone who dies, but not when that runs contrary to halacha. So therefore, again, even if someone requests to be cremated or above ground burial, if a family member has the ability to do what is right, it is an absolute service to the deceased to give them a proper burial for the reasons we just saw before. Number one, the degradation to the family, and number two, the incredible kapara that burial affects for the neshama. All right, we'll say along the same lines. Ibailahu, Hespeda, Yakar de Chai Have, or Yakar de Shchivi. I will say this is an incredible Gemara. Eulogies. Why do we deliver eulogies? Sammy Esterson knows. I open every single levaya with this. This is my, again, but I still think it's mamish is necessary. So the Gemara asks the following question. Not that Sammy follows me. It sounds weird. Not that he follows me to all levayas, right? We just happen to be a lot of the same levayas, right? Anyway, so the Gemara asks as follows. The Gemara says, Hespeda, a eulogy. Why do we deliver eulogies? Yakar de Chayehavi. Is it in honor to the living? In other words, we'll say, do we say that what a eulogy does is essentially a eulogy gives cover to the family. Gives cover to the family that people are speaking about their loved one. Right? Good. Or, yakar de shavi. Or no, it's not about cover to the family. It's about cover to the deceased. Cover to the deceased, right? The neshama is there by the levaya, and therefore the neshama hears all the incredible things that are being said about it. So the Gemara says, okay, l'may nafkamina, right? Who cares? What does it really matter? Da'amar lo tispedu Allahu gavra. So also listen to this. Let's say Reuven's on his deathbed, and Reuven says, I do not want any eulogies. You see this sometimes. People say, I don't want any eulogies at my levaya. So or for them I will say, they used to have professional wailers, not WHALER, right? In other words, like WAILER, right? In other words, that Lamaisa, people like professional criers, eulogize, like you would get these guys. I always wonder, like, what an interesting service to provide, right? But Lamaisa, the truth is, it's no different than bringing a band to the wedding. You always need a chevra who helps to set the mood. So these people would come, they would cry, they would eulogize, they would this. So what would happen? So can you force children to pay for the wailers, the criers, the eulogizers? So we'll say, now listen to this. So it depends. What does it depend on? If eulogies are about covered for the family, so then ultimately, again, even if Reuven says, I don't want any eulogies, we don't listen to him. We can give eulogies if we want. But if on the other hand, eulogies are about covered for the deceased, so if the soon-to-be deceased individual says, I don't want any eulogies, then we should listen to him. That's the shayla. So the Gemara said, let's analyze. Tashma, Vayava Avram, Lispol B'Sara V'Livkosa. Wow, I'm supposed to say, Parshas Chai Sarah. This is such a beautiful Gemara. Avram Avinu came to Sarah to eulogize for her and to cry for her. Because, it's interesting, Rabbi Soloveitchik points out on this pasuk, if you think about it, it doesn't seem to be the right order of things. It should be Vayavo Avram Livkos Lisara V'Lispoda. That he cried for her, and then he eulogized her, right? Crying is the most instinctive part. Instead it says that he eulogized her and he cried for her. So Rabbi Soloveitchik posits, he says that Avram understood that there were two parts to Sarah. There was public Sarah, there was private Sarah. There was Sarah as Avram Avinu's wife, and there was Sarah Imenu as the mother to the monotheistic community. So Avram Avinu put the loss of the community above his own personal loss. So first he eulogized her. That was for the community. And then only after he gave the community the opportunity to mourn for her, only then did he mourn his own personal loss. Overwhelming. Anyway, so V'i Amrit Mishum Yakar Dechayehu Mishum Yakar Davram Mashu L'Sara. Now, here's what's driving the Gemara, and this is very important. The Gemara understands over here that Halacha L'Maisa, Avram Avinu was not with Sarah when she passed away, right? Remember again, Avram was by the Akedah. Sarah Imenu dies in Be'er Sheva, right? So Avram Avinu, Sarah Imenu dies, and Avram Avinu was by the Akedah. So Avram Avinu has to come to Sarah when she died. So now remember, now that means that they delayed the burial of Sarah in order for Avram to come and to eulogize. So if you say, watch this, if you say that a eulogy is for the sake of the deceased, then I understand. Then it makes sense. It's covered for Sarah that they'll delay her burial. But if you say that a eulogy is covered for the living, so because of covered for Avram Avinu, that people should hear about his wife, that people should talk about his wife, and have covered for him, we delay the burial of Sarah? It doesn't seem to make that much sense. Mishum yakar dechayehu, mishum yakar de'Avram mashu l'Sara. So because of the covet to Avram Avinu, we're going to delay the burial of Sarah. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. We'll say, listen to how beautiful this is. No. Delaying the burial to give covet to Avram was covet to Sarah. Why? Sarah gufa nechale ki hechi d'miyakir ba Avram. So it was covered to Sarah for Avram to have covered. In other words, even if you want to say that eulogies are not for the dead, but eulogies are for the living, the greatest covet one could have given to Sarah Imenu was to give covet to her husband. The greatest nachas that Sarah would have would be to know that Avram Avinu was being treated beautifully with love and with care. He'll say, it is such a beautiful insight into marriage that at the end of the day, there's so much about what makes a beautiful and meaningful and holy marriage. And I will say, I think it's right here, on this Gemara, when you love and you care for someone so much that their needs are more important than your own, that's a beautiful, holy, and blissful relationship. A lot of times in marriage, I'm happy to do for the other, right? I'm happy to do for my spouse, as long as my needs are met. Right? It's like the prerequisite. Like in other words, as long as I'm good, I'm happy to give as much as needed. But the truth is, that's not really what it's about. Really, what marriage represents a level of selflessness that really goes above and beyond normative expectations. The ability to put another human being's needs above my own in totality. And to know that as long as that other person is happy, I'm good. I'm good. So for Sarah Imenu, what made Sarah Imenu happy? What was covered for Sarah? Covered for Sarah was to know that Avram was taken care of, even in death. Right? Sarah Imenu would be happy in death knowing that Avram was taken care of. Such a selflessness when it comes to marriage that literally, again, Avram, your needs are above mine. And by the way, you should just know, it was the reverse as well. Well, I'll just say something amazing. I'll tell you something. Avram and Sarah are like my heroes in marriage, besides obviously my own parents, all these people. But the heroes in marriage. Remember, Avram wanted to have children more than anything. Sarah couldn't have children. Avram never once brought up the idea of taking a second wife. Right? Who did it come from? Who brought up the idea of bringing up a second wife? Who brought it up? Sarah brought it up. Avram never brought it up. It never came up. It was never a suggestion. It was never mentioned. Why? Because Avram valued Sarah over anything. If it's a choice between Sarah's feelings and children, I'm going with Sarah's feelings. If it's a choice between Sarah's happiness and my future, I'm going with Sarah's happiness. But do you understand what it means to be committed to another human being? It's not about me. It's not about me. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mazmin me, a shidduch of HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows me to build a life with a partner, if he gives me that gift, which not everyone is zocheh to have, then by definition, the way to nurture that gift is to be 1,000,000% selfless. It's not that, okay, as long as my needs are met, I'm happy to give. A heightened level of selflessness in everything. That was Avram and Sarah, and that's what they modeled for us. Incredible. Tashma. All right, we're not going to finish this stuff. Okay. All right, it's too good. I don't know, it's not my fault. You put this, like Lifnei Iver. It's like Lifnei Iver over here. It's too good. All right, let's go. Tashma. V'saptulo called the Yisrael v'kaver. It picks up. V'saptulo called the Yisrael v'kaver also. So again, we're revisiting the psuki that I mentioned before by Aviyav ben Yeravam. So the Torah says they eulogized him and they buried him. And if you want to say that a eulogy is about honor to the living, Hanach b'nei Yikrininu, were the brothers or the family of Yeravam ben Nevat, were they deserving of kavod? So the Torah says Tzadikim want kavod to come to other people through them. Tashma lo yispedul v'lo yikbaru lo nechel tzadikim yakar b'rishayim. But the pasuk says they shall not be eulogized, they shall not be buried. So the Gemara says that ultimately tzadikim don't want kavod coming to Rishon. Tashma b'shalom tamus or b'misrafos avosecha malachim harishon mashahayu lefanecha kein yisrafu lecha vaya adon yispedu lach. So we'll say this is by Tzidkiyo. So by Tzidkiyo, the Navi tells him that ultimately again you're going to die in peace. And with the pyres of the kings who came before you will be for you. In other words, he's going to have a good death. They're going to eulogize you. Now again, if a eulogy is about honor to the living, not honor to the dead, so what does Tzidkiyo, what does it matter to Tzidkiyo that's going to eulogize him? Who cares? It's not about the dead, it's about the living. To which the Gemara says, this is what they mean to say to him, so ultimately, and Klal Yisrael will gain honor through you the same way that Klal Yisrael gained honor through your forefathers. So we'll say a really beautiful idea as well, that tzaddikim are happy when other people get honor through them. Right? Tzaddikim don't just need people, don't need their own honor. Tzaddikim are always happy when other people get covered through them. We'll say top of Mem Zayin, 47. Tashma, Nivza be'einav nimas. So this is David HaMelech in Tehillim. Nivza be'einav nimas, which literally means, again, someone who is lowly in his own eyes. Zech melech Yehuda. This refers to Chizkiyahu, the king of Yehuda. Shegirer atzmos aviv amita shel chavalim. He dragged his father's bones. Remember, so Chizkiyahu's father was a man by the name of Achaz. So ultimately, again, he went ahead and he dragged Achaz's bones on a bed of ropes. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? So remember, Achaz was a tremendous Rasha, introducing Avodah Zarah everywhere. Chizkiyahu was a tremendous tzaddik. One of the things that Chizkiyahu felt that he had to do when he first assumed the monarchy was absolutely, fundamentally, and totally repudiate the idolatry of his father. So the way he did that is literally he dragged his father's remains through the streets to show that this is done. This is a fundamental and complete repudiation of evil. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Richter spoke a little bit about this by Shalashul. This time he was talking about his grandmother, Zechus Bracha, about this concept of sometimes, needing to slap evil in the face and just say, no, this is not what we do. This is not how we do it. The Gemara goes weiter. So Gemara says, my time. So I'm sorry. And if we say that a eulogy is about cover to the living, my time. He did this ultimately again, so it should be kapara for his father, for Achaz. Mishum kapara davua mashuli liyikar di Yisrael. And because of kapara for his father, he should deny cover to Klal Yisrael. So Gemara says, Yisrael gufayu nechal likarayu legabe. For Klal Yisrael, it's good also. Whereas again, this was important even for Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael would forego the covered in order to go ahead and have kapara for Achaz. Tashma Amar Lahem. So we'll say, so again, remember, we're still tethered in our fundamental question. What's our fundamental question? What is the role of a eulogy? Is eulogy there ultimately, again, to go ahead, is it honor for the dead, or is it honor for the living? So Tashma, Abba said, this is an incredible Gemara. Tashma, Amar Lahen. So Abba said, this is Rabbi Huda Nossi. When Rabbi Huda Nossi, before he died, he gave a series of instructions to his children. And he said to his kids, he said to his family, Al tispiduni ba'ayaros. Do not go ahead and, don't eulogize me in the small villages. So remember again, they were taking Rabbi Huda Hanasi. He died in Sipori, and they were burying him in Beis Sha'arim. So they were going to go ahead and take his casket. It was a journey. And essentially they'd be making a number of stops along the way for eulogies. So he said to them, when you make stops to eulogize me, don't eulogize me in small towns. Only eulogize me in large cities where there will be a large gathering of people. That was his instruction. That was instruction. So the Gemara says, now again, if a eulogy is for covered for the living, then what does Rabbi Huda Nasi care where they eulogize him? What does it matter? Kasavar liyaskuru be Yisrael tfei. So Rabbi Huda Nasi felt that ultimately, again, the larger eulogies, you're right, wouldn't be a covet for him, but rather, again, it was a covet for Klal Yisrael. If people would see that Klal Yisrael was honoring their Torah scholars in such numbers, that would be a covet for Klal Yisrael. Incredible Tashma. So Gemara goes weiter. Helinu lechvodo. So now our Mishnah. What do we learn in our Mishnah? So we'll say the halacha is you're not allowed to delay burying the dead, right? But if they delayed burying the dead for the purposes of honoring the dead, for example, lahavilo aron v'tachrichin, to bring a casket or to bring shrouds, eino over alav. So we'll say you're not over. In other words, the only time you're not allowed to delay burial is when you're just delaying it for some other associated reason. But if the reason we're delaying burial is to give the mace even more covet, bring him shrouds, bring him a casket, that is going to be fine. So the Gemara says, my lav lechvodo shal mace. Doesn't it mean for the covet of the mace? Lo lechvodo shal chai. No, it means for the covet of the living. The Gemara says, what? So I don't understand. Out of covet for the living, we're going to delay the burial of the dead. How does that make any sense? No, because Torah says, you shall not leave his body hanging on the tree. Why? Because it's a degradation. So we say any degradation is comparable to hanging the body on a tree. So the Gemara says, listen to this. When are you not allowed to delay burial? When delaying will result in a degradation for the dead. But over here, because there is no bizayon, therefore again, so we'll say, so it's interesting. You're allowed to go ahead and delay this actually comes up a little bit, where delaying burial in a way that doesn't present to be zion for the dead. Again, it's also, all of these things are also very different in our current circumstances with refrigeration. So remember again, in the times of the Gemara, even not so long ago, before refrigeration, so leaving someone unburied for any amount of time, especially again during the summer, could really result in significant humiliation for the dead. So a lot of these things have changed, but the Gemara is suggesting that sometimes we're getting this interesting interface between what's considered to be covered for the mace and covered for the living. What we're going to ultimately see is that sometimes these things very much intersect. Watch this. Tashma. Heilinu lichvodo, l'shamea alav ayaros, lahavi limakonenos, lahavi la'aron v'tachrichin, eino over alav. So we'll say, if we leave a person unburied, in order to give people more time to come to the levaya, right? Let people know that so-and-so died, let people come to the levaya, to bring, again, the criers, to go ahead and bring a casket, shrouds, eino over alav. One is not in violation of halalas hameis, delaying the burial. Shekala osa eino ela lichvodo shameis. Because whoever does these things, ultimately, again, is doing it for the kavod hameis. Halchi kamar, kala osa lichvodo shalchai, ein bo bizayon hameis. So what the Gemara really means to say is like this. Anything that's done for the kavod of the living, ultimately is not a bizayon of the mace. In other words, there's an intersectionality between these two concepts about what's covered for mace and covered for chai, right? That ultimately, again, these things very much converge. Because if people are allowed to mourn more properly, then what? That gives greater honor to the dead. See, even if it turns out that we're delaying the burial a little bit, not a lot, a little bit, to give people the opportunity to mourn, that's called honor for the living, but really it translates into honor for the dead as well. Therefore, the Gemara says, Tashma, Rabbi Nassim says, it's very interesting, Simin Yafal Ameis. This is fascinating. It is a good omen for the dead, where something negative happens after the person dies. For example, so the Gemara says, Meis Shelo Nispad, for example, let's say you have someone who was not eulogized appropriately, Velo Nikbar, or someone who wasn't buried at all. Oshe Chaya Goras, or someone was dragged away by a wild animal, also not buried. Oshe Hayu Gishamim Mizalfin Al Mitaso, or was raining on the funeral bier. Zeu Simin Yafel Lemes. This is a good sign for the mace. I'm saying, how are these things a good sign for a mace? Because essentially Rashi points out over here that what it means is retribution is being exacted for the punishments of the deceased on its body here in this world, so that the neshama will not have to suffer in the next. In general, again, Abba, so we have this idea, that it's a very high level to reach, but it's certainly something that we have to aspire to, that when difficult things happen to us in life, there is a certain element of simcha that has to come with it. Why? Because every little bit of tsar, every little bit of discomfort or pain or difficulty that I have in this world means that it's less that I have to suffer in the next, right? All of us have spiritual baggage, and all of us have things for which we need atonement for. And when that atonement is exacted from us in this world, it means there is less punishment and less atonement in the world to come. So the Gemara just suggests over here something. Now, obviously, again, that's a very high level to reach. But even if I can't, sometimes we'll say life is about things that I know to be true, even if I'm not really holding there just yet. Incredible. So the Gemara says something amazing. The Gemara says, now, so what do you see from here? So the Gemara says, Shema Mina Yikra de Shafchi. So what do you see from here? What did the Gemara say? For our purposes, what's important over here? Someone died and they weren't properly eulogized. I don't know. You could come up with this case in a number of different ways. We'll say, you know where this does happen? Someone dies on Chalamayid. Right? Or it's a graveside funeral. Today, in America, we're very used to like funeral home levayas, right? So, but again, in many places, season all the time, it's not necessarily funeral home levayas, right? So it's graveside, and it's pouring. It's pouring, right? So a person doesn't get the hesped that they deserved. So the Gemara says, you know what? It's actually a beautiful thing. Because since there's a pain in missing out on the eulogies, that lack of eulogy benefits the deceased. What do you see from here? That whose purpose, who do eulogies serve? Who is it for? It's for the dead. eulogies at the end of the day, delivering of eulogies are really for a benefit for the dead. Right? Yikra the shachli, ultimately again, benefit for the dead. Therefore, again, if the dead person doesn't receive it, it's part of his kapara. So Rabbi say, bottom line, the Gemara says, Shmamina, Yikra the shachli, Shmamina. So we see from here that eulogies, Rabbi say, ultimately again, are for the dead. Now the truth is, the reality is, it's not really mutually exclusive. They could both be right. Eulogies have this duality. On one hand, again, they're absolutely both. So this is incredibly important because, sometimes people don't understand the profundity and depth of a eulogy. And they'll talk about sometimes like the most inane things in a eulogy. So imagine for a moment, a person says goodbye to a loved one. Imagine if somebody said to you, you have 5 more minutes to speak to your mother, to your father, to your brother, to your wife, to your husband. Imagine somebody said 5 minutes. You wouldn't say, thank you for the crab cakes. It's actually happened. Right? Oh, did you know how to use Old Bay? I'm like, oh my God, Ribono Shel Olam. Oh, sorry, right? Imagine if someone said, right? If someone said to you, you have 5 more minutes to speak to your parent, to speak to your spouse. Imagine that was said. Matt, that was a little delayed over there. What happened? That was the sound trial, right? So I'm just saying. Think about this. Somebody said you have 5 more minutes to speak to your loved one. 5 minutes, you and your loved one. That's what a eulogy is. That's what a eulogy is. It's not to paint the picture. People think like it's about a historical picture. Those are all very nice things. That's great, right? You could post that on the Levinson's website, right? All of that is there. People could read that on their own. That's not what a eulogy is. A eulogy is an opportunity, a last opportunity. The mace is right there to speak to the mace. To speak to the mace. Because in every single relationship, there are things that we wish we said that we never got a chance to say. Or maybe didn't say it in the right way. Or maybe didn't say it enough. And that's the power of a eulogy. Yikra de shavchi. It's ultimately, again, it's for the dead. It's for the dead. Now, it also happens to be that it serves a benefit for the living as well. So it's not mutually exclusive. But the ikr essence of the eulogy ultimately is for the dead. All right, well, let's go back there. Lo hayu kovrin. So most remember again, next part of the Mishnah was that they would not go ahead and bury the dead in the same cemetery, right? When somebody was executed by Beis Din, they were not buried in the same cemetery as someone who just died stam. So the Gemara says, "V'chol kach lama." Why? Like it seems so severe. So why do that? The fishen kovin rasha etzel tzaddik, because we do not bury Rishon next to tzaddikim. This is a big thing. It's a big thing. We don't bury Rishon and next to. Or as well say, you say to yourself, "Well, come on. Once you die, kind of like death is the great equalizer." And the answer is no, it's not. No, it's not. A tzaddik lived his life a certain way, and the truth is, he worked really hard to live his life that way. And a rasha didn't work hard. Okay, so you reap what you sow. A tzaddik is not right. A rasha is not buried next to a tzaddik because, again, you live your life a certain way, you're going to die a certain way, and you're going to be buried a certain way, and that's just the way that it is. So the Gemara says, how do we know that we don't bury Rishoyim next to tzaddikim? Shneimar, vayihi heim kovrim ish. This is wild. Okay, so listen to this story. This is from Navi. From Malachim Beis. Listen to this. So the Torah is talking about Klal Yisrael was at war. They were at war. And what happens? So they were burying one of the casualties of war. V'nei roes hagidud. And they saw the approaching enemy army to them. So what did they do? Vayashlichu as ha'ish bekever alisha. So they didn't have time to bury the body. So they threw it into a burial cave. Right? Threw it into a burial cave. It happens to be the burial cave they threw it into was the burial cave of the Navi Elisha. Get ready for this. We'll say, get ready for this. What happened? So again, remember the way they used to bury is they would bury in caves, right? Well, first they bury in the ground, and then often what they would do is after the body decomposed, they would collect the bones and they would place it like in a catacomb, like in a cave. You can see this. I don't know if anyone ever went to the grave of Shimon HaTzadik. Usually popular. It's in East Jerusalem. So so it's like on the other side of the road. Hey, right next to it, there happens to be a kever they call the kever of the Sanhedrin Chana, right? Which is like they unearthed like this massive burial catacomb. So what's interesting is over there you can see they have like shelves, and the bones are placed on shelves there. It's fascinating. So the guy's thrown into the burial cave of Elisha. Listen to this. His body comes in contact with Elisha. Vayaga ish ba'atzmos Elisha, vayichi vayakam al raglav. You cannot make this up. The man, right? So the dead man comes in contact with the bones of Elisha. He came back to life. So the Gemara will say, now why did he come back? Now the Gemara says, why is he coming back to life? So apparently this man was a rasha, and he did not deserve to be buried in the same grave as Elisha, because we don't bury Rishon next to tzaddikim. So a miracle occurred. He came back to life, walked out. So I'm going to pop of a dimali kiyume na avina pishnayim beruchacha Eli. So we'll say now maybe he came back to life for a different reason. Before Eliyahu died, so Elisha asked him for a bracha. This is an incredible bracha. So Elisha said to Eliyahu, I would like to be doubly as great as you. Can you imagine that? Right? He says to Eliyahu, I'd like to be double as great as you. Now I'll say what that means is, remember, Eliyahu brought one person back to life. Elisha said, I want to be doubly as great as you. So Elisha therefore should bring back two people to life. Now Elisha died, he only brought back one person to life. Maybe this was his pishnayim. Maybe this was his double portion. Maybe this was the second time he brought someone back to life. That's it. Ihachi, we'll say first wide line. Ihachi, haydudisanya araglav amadula beisalahalach. Here's the problem. It's true, the guy came back to life. We'll say, what happened? He came back to life. He walked out of the burial cave and he died. In other words, he didn't go back home. Like, shalom aleichem. He didn't go back home. He came back to life enough to walk out of the burial cave and then died immediately afterwards. So it's like Mar just digress just a second. So by the way, how did Elisha get his pishnayim? How did Elisha get his double portion? When did he bring a second person back to life? Oh, you know what he did? Naaman, who was the general of Aram, was stricken with tsaras. Elisha cured him from tsaras. And we know that someone with saras is considered to be like they're dead. So the curing of Naaman from his saras was like the Tchias HaMesim. The Chsiv Anati Kames Ukashem. So therefore, we'll say, but you see, what do you see from here? What's the takeaway from here? The takeaway from here is that we don't bury a rasha next to a tzaddik. Ukashem Shein Kovrin Rasha Eitzel Tzaddik. In the same way that we don't bury a rasha next to a tzaddik. Kach in Kovrin Rasha Chamer Eitzel Rasha Kal. So too, we do not bury a serious rasha next to a smaller rasha. Right? I guess there's like we'll call like there are people who are expert Rishonim, and then there are people who dabble, right? Rasha dabblers, right? So Lamaisha, there's like a Rasha, and there's like a Rasha law, a little Rasha law, you just like a Shefel Rasha law, right? So there are different levels of Rishonim. We don't go ahead and bury a real Rasha next to a little Rasha law. So the Gemara says, v'liskun arba kvaros. So in other words, so maybe you should have a different cemetery for every different misas bezin, right? There's 4 misas bezin, 4 different ways bezin has have 4 different cemeteries. Tilson Family says, no, shnei kvaros gemara gemilach. We have a tradition, you only need 2. Okay. So I'll say, so by the way, that is an interesting halacha about not burying Rishonim next to tzaddikim. Now again, obviously that can get a little bit sensitive in terms of who exactly is the decider on this. I will say, but that's why, for example, you do have certain cemeteries that do have restrictions like this. Shomer Shabbos. Like, they're right. Chevra Avos Chesed has this about being a Shomer Shabbos. There are certain cemeteries that absolutely do maintain certain religious strictures and certain religious obligations upon the people who are going to be buried there. Okay. Gemara says, Amalei Ulam Rabbi Yochanan. Achol Chelev v'Hifresh Karban. This is a very interesting halacha over here. If someone ate chelev, right? Now chelev is forbidden fat. Someone ate chelev, and again, which is obviously illegal, and then realized what he did and separated it out to carbon. So he's ready to offer up a carbon, and then what happens? Vehemer daito, and then he became an apikoris. So Reuven, it's been a busy day for Reuven, right? He began the day by eating chelev accidentally. After he did that, he realized what he did wrong. He separated out a carbon, and then after that, he became an apikoris. Now the story is not over. The Chazar, then Baruch Hashem became a Baal Tshuva. Came about tshuva. I will say this just shows you what a person could pack into one day. Right? If you maximize your time, you can really accomplish a lot. So he goes ahead and now he becomes about tshuva. So what's the halacha? This is fascinating. Hoil v'nitcha yitcha. I will say the halacha is an apikores is not allowed to offer up a carbon. You can't accept the carbon of an apikores. So watch this. Once this carbon was owned by an apikores, then what's the halacha? It can't be re-offered up. So even though Reuven now became a Baal Tshuva, he needs to separate a new carbon. He can't use that carbon. Why? The Gemara is just because of Hol v'yitcha yitcha. Once something has been set aside for non-use, it cannot be reused. Incredible. So another case. Reuven ate chaylev accidentally, separated out a carbon, and then he became insane. He became insane, right? A shota, v'chazav and but then he became sane again. So what's that? Hol v'nitcha yitcha. We'll say since a person who's a shota can't offer up a carbon, so again, essentially, since the carbon was owned by a shota, it can't be offered. Even though he subsequently becomes sane again, halacha l'maisa, he still can't offer up that carbon. Why? Once the carbon has been set aside for non-use, it's set aside for non-use. Incredible. Utzricha. Now, why do I need both of these cases? They seem to be redundant, right? They seem to be the exact same case. So why do I need both cases? Utzricha. V'yashmin and kamaisa. If you would have just told me the first case, ultimately again, of apikarsus, I would have said, Mishum de'ihu dacha nafshe biadayim. He became an apikoris on his own. Aval hai dimamela kadachi. But in the case of the guy who became insane, ultimately again he didn't choose that. That just happened on its own. Maybe he's like someone who's sleeping, and therefore again when he wakes back up, ultimately again he could offer up the carbon. And if we would have just said the case of insanity, he doesn't have the ability to go ahead and return. Right? He doesn't have the ability to determine when he's going to become sane again. But in the case where he has the ability, ultimately again to become about tshuva, maybe halacha l'maisa, he can't offer it up. Therefore, we'll say again, in both of these cases, he can't offer up the carbon. Why? Because essentially, if the carbon was owned by someone who is unfit to offer it, it is forever set aside for non-use. Even if the person's status changes, he's going to have to set aside a different animal. The concept is holo v'nitcha yitcha. Once something is set aside for non-use, ultimately, again, it remains set aside for non-use. As well says the Shimon is supposed to haskellness, which is in life, there are certain doors that close that once they close, you cannot reopen them. You see, we like to be able to think that if we don't take advantage of certain opportunities when they're in front of them, it's okay. I'll get to it later. And there are situations in life like that where if you don't take advantage now, in Miras Hashem, the opportunity will be there later. But there are many things in life where if you don't take advantage now, once the door closes, it closes. You cannot pry it back open. You're not getting back that opportunity. Once again, you can't do it anymore, then ultimately again, you are done. Now, the beautiful news is, there's always more opportunities, right? There's always additional things afterwards, right? But Lamaisa, again, sometimes once it's done, it's done. So the Gemara goes right. That's why I have to be so careful about to be mindful of our life opportunities, to be mindful of the doors that open in front of us, to take advantage. Because we think we're going to get to it when it's a little bit less busy, a little bit quieter. It never happens. The Gemara goes right there. Rabbi Yosef, Afananami Tanina. Hayuba Kachim. So it's my Irani Dachas over here. Hayuba Kachim Mizbeach. So this is by Irani Dachas, which is a city that is condemned because the inhabitants worshipped idolatry. So now again, let's say in the Irani Dachas itself, there were kachim. There were sacrificial items. So halach is kachim mizbeach yamusu. Anything that was going to be offered up on the mizbeach should be killed. Kachim b'the kabayis yiftu. Anything that had financial sanctity, ultimately again should be redeemed. Va'avinamba amayamusu. Why do you have to kill them? Why do you have to slaughter the animals? Kevan de ikdil havilu kapara v'lesaku legavoa. Once the people of the Erni Dachas are killed, ultimately again that's their kapara, and then you can use the karbanos. Because once something is set aside for non-use, it remains set aside for non-use. The Gemara says, but now so that's the concept of hol v'yitchu yitchu. Then the Gemara says, Abaye, mis sarvis meis misoch risho havili kapara. 1 second, Abaye says, 1 second. Do you think that death by itself atones? In other words, we're going with this theme that death atones. But Abaye says, do you think that if someone just dies as a rasha, that their death atones for them? So Gemara says, meis misoch risho lahavi kapara. Rabbi say, if a person is a rasha and then he just dies, natural causes, the Gemara says that's not kapara. That doesn't provide atonement. The Tanir Shmaya, Yachal afilu perish avos amidarchid sibor yitama. You might have thought to say that maybe, let's say a Kohen. Kohen has a father or his parents, and his parents went off the derech. His parents became apikarsim. You might have thought that a Kohen should be metame himself for these immediate relatives. Tamulomar ba'amov, ba'ose maisa amov. Only when the parents are on the right derech is a son who is a Kohen metame for those parents. Now, what do you see from there, Bosai? You see from there, but they died. Isn't death mechaper? No. Death, what kind of death is mechaper? When someone is executed, that type of death is mechaper. But just stam dying of natural causes, that's not necessarily mechaper. How can you compare someone who's executed because of his rishos to someone who died of natural causes while being a rasha? Meis misoch risho, kevan dechi arche kamayis, lo havi le kapara. Nerag mitoch risho, kevan delav ki arche mayis, havi le kapara. Rabbi said, this is an incredible distinction. If a person is a rasha and they die of natural causes as a rasha, that death does not atone. If a person is a rasha and they're executed because of their rishos, that death atones. Now we're going to see even that death by itself doesn't atone either. There has to be more. Teida, Dichsiv, Mizmor Yasaf, Elokim, Bo Goy Ben Achal Asech. So we'll say this is about the destruction of Beis Hamikdash. Mizmor Yasaf, the Gentile nations have come into your Beis Hamikdash. Timo Seichal Kochecha, they have defiled your holy sanctuary. Nasnu Efsnivlas Avadecha Machala Ofa Shamayim. They have given literally again the carcasses of your servants as food for the birds. Besar chasidecha lechais sa'aretz, the flesh of your chasidim to the animals of the earth. My avadecha, my chasidecha. What's avadecha? What's chasidecha? So the Gemara says, Lav chasidecha mamish. Chasidecha refers to real chasidim. Real chasidim, in other words, truly pious individuals. So the Gemara says, Avadecha hani demechayve dina demeikara. Avadecha refers to, these were people who were Rishayim. And once they were executed, kari the avadecha. Once they were executed by a Beis Din, they were called avadecha. What do you see from here? You see from here that someone executed by Beis Din ultimately becomes a tzaddik. Amrle Abaye, mikam adamis amabeis, mikam adamis haruge malchus haruge Beis Din. Can you actually compare people who are executed by the monarchy to people who are executed by Beis Din? Haruge malchus, those executed by the malchus, Kevan dishalo bedin kamiktali, since havile kapara. So I'll say somebody executed by Beis Din, since that's an abnormal death sentence, an abnormal reality, death is mechaper. Haruge Beis Din, haruge malchus, that's death by a Gentile government. So those who are killed, let's say by our enemies, that ultimately, again, because that's abnormal, therefore that's mechaper. They're killed at Kiddush Hashem. On the other hand, the Gemara says, haruge Beis Din, but those killed by Beis Din, de bedin kamiktali, who are killed because of legal trespass, lo havilu kapara. Ultimately, again, that death is not a kapara. So we'll say, now the Gemara is suggesting there are three types of death. Death of natural causes, death by enemies, which is like a death al Kiddush Hashem, and death by a Beis Din. So the Gemara now wants to suggest death of natural causes and death by Beis Din does not automatically affect kapara. Death by enemies, right, essentially being killed al Kiddush Hashem, that automatically affects kapara. I'll tell you why this is true. This nan, we'll say a few more minutes. This nan, when someone is executed by Beis Din, we don't go ahead and bury him in the kever of his fathers. But if you say that execution, death by a Beis Din, ultimately again affects kapara, then why wouldn't you bury him in the burial place of his forefathers? To which the Gemara says, no, misa ukvura ba'inan. No, really the atonement requires death, right? Death and burial. So Gemara says, when somebody was executed by Beis Din, we would not go ahead, there was no avelos. This was yesterday's Mishnah, no avelos, but there was only aninos. She'ein aninos ela balev. Because aninos ultimately, again, is in the heart. So the Gemara says, but if you hold that once a person is executed, that Allah again it's a kapara, so let them mourn. To which the Gemara said, no. Really, kapara takes effect in three things. Number one, execution. Number two, burial. Number three, decomposition. Therefore, again, you can't do avelos because, again, not until decomposition. To which the Gemara says, Daikinami diktani nisachel habasar malaktin esatzamas. The Kovrin also been common shmamina. What do we see from here? We see Rabbi say that again. What did the Gemara say? The Mishnah said that Allah, after we bury them, after the body decomposes, we could then do likud atzamos. So you could gather the bones and then afterwards rebury the individual. Ultimately, again in kavar abosa. So Rabbi say what comes out of here is something really interesting. So what comes out of here is halacha l'maisa, three different types of death. Death from natural causes. Well, more than what I mean is. A person is a rasha, and now they die in one of three ways, either natural causes. So it is clear that if a rasha dies of natural causes, what's the impact of his death on his rishos? The impact of his death on his rasha status? Zero. Still a rasha. If he dies because he is killed by what we call harugei malchus, he's killed by Gentile nations because he's a Jew, then what's the halacha? His death is mechaper. Right, that's dying al kiddush Hashem. His death is absolutely mechaper. Then there's the third type of death. The third type of death is being executed by Beis Din. So what happens when Beis Din executes a rasha? So I'll say here it appears that it's interesting. Here it appears that there is kapara, but kapara really requires three things. Number one, execution. Number two, burial, and number three, decomposition. Now the truth is we already know that death execution by Beis Din is not mechaber by itself. How do we know this? What did the Mishnah say? When they were 10 amas away from the Beis HaSkila, what did the Beis Din say then? What did the Beis Din say? Right? His svada. He still had to do vidui. Right? You see from here that death by itself is not mechaber even for Misas Beis Din. Why? Because again, they would order him to do vidui. They would order him to confess his sins. So the fact that he had to do vidui, the fact that he had to confess his sins, indicates to us that death by itself was not mechaper. Even Misas Beis Din is not mechaper. But rather again, even death by a Beis Din is still going to require, number one, tshuva. You got to do vidui before you die. Number two, execution. Number three, burial. Number four, decomposition. We'll stop over here. Shkoyach. I want to point out, it's really Rabbi Richter's fault. He didn't get, that's his fault. He was supposed to get to the end of Amud Beis yesterday. It's all on him. So if you see him, please make sure to blame him for our lack of this. We'll say, shkoyach, everyone.
Doesn't get to see them. He might have show now.